For me, mapping is visualizing relations between processes, between people, between objects, and making those relationships visible so that they can be thought about, discussed, and subverted if that's what one wants to do, and not just objects which are visible and which are under everybody's eyes, but also things like subjectivities and affects and more immaterial elements of the way objects and places and people relate to each other.
For me, mapping is a contested practice that many people can take up in different ways. And I think there are two forms of mapping that we're at a point where it becomes interesting to challenge them. On the one hand, mapping is something as an administrative tool that facilitates the accepted movement of things. On the other hand, mapping is science that pretends to show the world in a neutral, objective way. And the contest between those two forms of mapping for me is not particularly interesting. It's interesting to subvert the idea of neutrality, but also the idea that maps should only facilitate the smooth functioning of things, because the world is not smooth. And maps are capable of empowering people, but also of disempowering people. And this is where I'm interested in taking mapping, using mapping, what we can learn from that type of mapping and from scientific mapping, and using it in different ways to help other movements in the world.
For me, mapping is a way of communicating knowledge. I mean, that might be too complex to represent in other kinds of formats. It's not a neutral process, and for us, it's a way of communicating specific issues that we are concerned about and want to be able to discuss with people. That might be difficult to do in other kinds of formats. So the actual tactile object that we produced is really an important part of the process of mapping, because it gives an opportunity to engage in a different way that other kinds of ways of communicating knowledge perhaps aren't able to offer.